Tucker Carlson is a strange fellow. He has takes every now and then that make you do a double take and make you facepalm and make you wonder what the hell's going on in his mind. And it makes you wonder if he really believes the stuff he's saying or if he's just putting on an act. Does he have Alex Jones syndrome? I mean, we learned that in the court trial where Alex Jones basically argued, I'm just an entertainer. I'm playing a character. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't we hear something along those lines with Tucker as well? I'm not making that up, am I? I'm pretty sure we heard that at some point with Tucker as well. Well, anyway, here we go. Tucker Carlson did an astounding anti-mask rant on his show the other night.
We did give in. This grotesque version of Halloween went on for more than a year, and it's still going on. Not even Tony Fauci still pretends that masks are medically necessary. Instead, masks are purely a sign of political obedience, like Kim Il-sung pins in Pyongyang. We wear them because we have to. The only people who wear masks voluntarily outside are zealots and neurotics. How neurotic are they? Well, we know. A Pew survey from last March found that 64% of white Americans who classify themselves as liberal or very liberal have been diagnosed with an actual mental health condition. And you see them everywhere when you walk down the street in any major city. If you dare to go on foot from Union Station to the Capitol, for example, in Washington without wearing a mask, angry Biden voters will snort at you in judgment. How could you? They're saying from behind the gauze. How could you? That's the question we should be asking of them in return. The rest of us should be snorting at them first. They're the aggressors. It's our job to brush them back and restore the society we were born in. So the next time you see someone in a mask on the sidewalk or on the bike path, do not hesitate. Ask politely but firmly, would you please take off your mask? Science shows there is no reason for you to be wearing it. Your mask is making me uncomfortable. We should do that, and we should keep doing it until wearing a mask outside is roughly as socially accepted as lighting a Marlboro in an elevator. It's repulsive. Don't do it around other people. That's the message we should send because it's true. As for forcing children to wear masks outside, that should be illegal. Your response when you see children wearing masks as they play should be no different from your response to seeing someone beat a kid in Walmart. Call the police immediately. Contact Child Protective Services. Keep calling until someone arrives. What you're looking at is abuse. It's child abuse, and you are morally obligated to attempt to prevent it. If it's your own children being abused, then act accordingly. Let's say your kid's school emailed you to announce that every day after lunch, your sixth grader was going to get punched in the face by a teacher. How would you respond to that? That's precisely how you should respond when they tell you that your kids have to wear masks on the soccer field. That is unacceptable, it is dangerous, and we should act like it, because it is.
Where do I begin with this one? I mean, listen. First things first, I'll state the obvious, and this is something that the CDC and the FDA just admitted. It is true that when you are outside and you're not really close with other people, that you don't have to wear a mask because it's very, very difficult for the virus to transfer outside. So that's a fact. Now, there are caveats, of course. If you are, let's say, a concert outdoors, and you're elbow to elbow with people, you should wear a mask in that situation because you probably can spread the virus when people are that close outside. But yes, if you're at a park and you're distanced from other people and you're outside, it's very, very difficult to contract the virus because it disperses when people talk. So usually like in closed areas when you're indoors with people, that's where it's much, 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 much more dangerous. So those are the facts. Let's just get that out of the way. Everything he's saying here is psychotic. He says wearing a mask outside is no different than people wearing Kim Il-sung pins in North Korea. It's just performative. Okay, I think it's quite different than people wearing the pins of a dictator in an authoritarian country. Call me crazy. See, the thing is, yes, there may be no reason to wear it outside when people are dispersed and not close to each other, of course. But you're also not doing any harm to anybody. Also, he says masks aren't medically necessary. The way he uses his language here is really problematic because he says masks are not medically necessary. He's talking about it in the context of being outside, but there are plenty of people who are going to hear that line, masks are not medically necessary, and they're going to interpret it beyond just outside. Then he calls people who wear masks outside, quote, aggressors. They're not an aggressor against anything. And by the way, I thought about this a lot recently. When you're outside in the winter and you're wearing a mask, the mask is nice to have just to keep you warmer. So I'd be wearing it because it keeps me warmer, not even wearing it because it's like, I think I'm preventing myself from getting the virus or preventing myself from giving the virus to anybody else while I'm outside. No, it's just a nice addition to have when it's 30 degrees outside. It keeps getting worse and worse. Quote, next time you see someone in a mask outside, ask firmly but politely, can you please take off your mask? Or mind your own fucking business and leave everybody alone to do whatever the hell they want. Again, is it true you don't need masks when you're outside and people are far apart? Yes, that's true. You don't. But nobody's getting hurt here. There's no downside. None at all. So it's not impacting you in any way, shape, or form if somebody else decides to wear a mask outside. And I'm sure there's some people who wear the mask outside, again, who understand and know that it's much more difficult to get the virus when you're outside. But you want to take away their freedom and their choice to wear the mask. That's what he wants to do. Listen, it's not a crazy idea to wear a mask during a pandemic, even if you are outside. Who can look at that like this is crazy or this is insane? Again, if you're outside and you're away from people, I won't begrudge you not wearing it. I don't wear it in a situation like that. But if somebody does, am I offended by it? Is it, quote, repulsive, the word he used? No, that's nowhere near repulsive. Think this is what he chose to do a segment on in the middle of a pandemic, a giant economic downturn, 8 wars, because we're bombing at least 8 different countries, a country where tens of millions of people don't have health insurance, an infrastructure that's crumbling. This is what he chose to take time out of his show to talk about. This is just garbage contrarian bullshit. Like he just wants to be a contrarian and say silly things. That's effectively how this strikes me. Then, he really, really, really goes to Crazyville because he says, he compares wearing a mask outside to lighting a Marlboro on an elevator. Those are not remotely similar. When you light a Marlboro on an elevator, there is science that shows there is such a thing as secondhand smoke. Now, if you just, encounter it every once in a while, it's no big deal to your health. It's not a big deal. But, secondhand smoke in the sense of like a parent smokes in the house with the kid and the kid is always in the house with the parent. And so for the developmental years of their life, every day they're breathing in that smoke. That's not good. But like lighting a Marlboro on an elevator, that's definitely an issue because you're breathing in carcinogens. And you smoking the cigarette affects other people. You wearing a mask outside affects nobody else. Nobody. If you're wearing a mask outside, that's your prerogative. There's no downside to other people. Smoking a cigarette on an elevator, there are big downsides to other people. They'll smell it. A lot of people hate the smell of it. Their clothes will stink. It's the secondhand smoke thing that we just discussed. That's just a terrible analogy or terrible comparison. What are you talking about, Tucker? Again, I think he's just being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. He views that as like, he's one of those people who just likes to dissent from the crowd. Then he says, wearing a mask outside is like child abuse. For if your kid is wearing a mask outside, that's like child abuse. It should be illegal. And your kid wearing a mask outside is like if the teacher was punching the kid every day. How would you react to your teacher punching the kid every day? I mean, there's no other way to put this. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. That's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. It really is. It's not remotely close to child abuse. Not at all. Having kids wear masks in a pandemic in a situation where it's very unlikely they'll get the virus outside, that's just being overly cautious. That's how I would describe that. That's not anywhere near child abuse. In fact, you can make a case it's the opposite of child abuse. You can make the case it's much closer to child abuse if you have parents telling their kids they can't wear masks indoors during the pandemic or something to that effect. And by the way, in this country, I'm sure people like that exist. We have anti-maskers. We have people who are hard right on the political spectrum. Think the whole thing is a hoax. There is no such thing as this pandemic being real. And so they would tell their kids, you're not allowed to wear the mask even inside. I'm sure that exists. That is much more like child abuse than kids wearing masks outside where it's not really necessary in the middle of a pandemic. He really compared it to child abuse, said it should be illegal. That's what you want the cops enforcing? Tucker, this is where you want the cops to put time and energy and resources instead of, focusing on robbery, grand larceny, assault, rape, murder. This is where you want the cops to spend their time? Harassing kids to take off masks if they're wearing it outside? As if this is a problem in any way, shape, or form? He really compared it to your kid getting punched. Wearing a mask outside is like your kid getting punched. No, your kid getting punched is like your kid getting punched. Wearing a mask outside is a parent who's overly cautious and maybe a little germophobic. That's it. I mean, it's so silly. And there's not nearly enough nuance in this in the sense that he doesn't really stress that you really should be wearing them inside, particularly if you're not vaccinated. He doesn't stress that at all. So, the takeaway you get from this, there's plenty of people who watch Tucker who are fringe cases. They're borderline cases. They're half on this planet, half on Neptune. And they hear stuff like this. There might be some people who act on this man. I don't think it'll be a very high number, but there might be a small percentage of his audience who's going to act on this stuff and who are going to, really enforce this stuff, really compare their kid being told to wear a mask outside on the playground at school or something to child abuse, maybe try to sue the school, harass the teacher. I mean, this is what he's calling for. This is what he's calling for. He's calling for people to walk up to strangers on the street and say, "Excuse me, can you please take off your mask?" What happened to the right-wingers who pretend like they're all about freedom of choice? Wouldn't this be a choice? It's a choice to wear a mask even if there's only a 1% chance or less than 1% chance you're going to get the virus outside. Wouldn't that be somebody's choice? It's not that they're in favor of freedom. It's that they want to define what people are and aren't allowed to do, and they get angry when their political opponents try to define what people are and aren't allowed to do. So, I mean, this guy has flip-flopped more times than I can count on the coronavirus in general. Like, he's gone back and forth on COVID-19. Oh, it's a big threat. Oh, there was the original reports that he tried to prod Trump at Mar-a-Lago to take COVID-19 more seriously. And there was glowing headlines about him and a few articles that gave him credit. We talked about that on this show. And then he went from that to, stages of COVID denialism and then flipped back. And then now he's doing this mask song and dance. It's just really fucking stupid. Listen, the official scientific bodies are clearly not perfect. And the leaders, the experts, are clearly not perfect. We saw it with Dr. Fauci when he lied early in the pandemic and basically said, you don't need masks. That's what he said early in the pandemic. Now, the reason he said it, he later admitted, is because they thought we were going to have a mask shortage for frontline workers. So he basically lied to the public to get them to not panic buy masks so that the frontline workers can have it. But he lied. And so that undermined the credibility of these scientific bodies. So I get skepticism. Skepticism is healthy. You always want to question power. You always want to question authority, no doubt about it. But let me assure you of something. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a scientific expert. I don't know Dickie McGeezax compared to the real experts. And you have to have that humility. You do. And I just don't see that humility with a lot of people in the national conversation. And it's the saddest thing I've ever seen. And again, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And we're left with really idiotic rants like this, where talk about overreaching, talk about a ridiculous comparison. I get it, dude. Everybody gets it. And by the way, I think that was most people's interpretations all along of the COVID rules. Even when the CDC and the FDA were like, hey, you should probably wear masks outside just to be safe, I think everybody kind of knew, if you're far away from people and you're outside, no, you don't. You don't have to do that. So this isn't earth-shattering from the CDC and the FDA to admit what most people thought was obvious. So, I mean, this is they come out and say something that's banal and obvious, and he treats it like it's a giant scandal, and he takes it way too far. And he says, your kid's wearing masks outside is like child abuse. It's like your kid getting punched. You see somebody wearing a mask outside, that's akin to lighting a cigarette in an elevator. It's just, this is taking it to the extreme and making it beyond absurd. It's hard to imagine, the way he talks in this segment, it's hard to imagine anybody reasoning with him. Because this is just This is ideological extremism is what it is. That's how it strikes me. I mean, really, comparing wearing masks outside to wearing Kim Il-sung pins in North Korea? It's a sign of compliance. No, it's a sign of being overly cautious in a pandemic, you fucking doofus. So anyway, man, this guy's a mess. And it's a shame. He's the #1 news show on TV. And so there are negative consequences to this. And there are negative consequences to, vaccine denialism, for example. And we got to get to herd immunity. And to herd immunity, you need what? 70%, 80%? I don't know the exact number, so don't quote me, of people vaccinated. And, stuff like this is certainly not helping. Certainly not helping. So, listen, even though it's true, you don't need to wear masks outside, particularly when you're not really close to people. That's the reality. Those are the facts. The idea that a kid wearing a mask on the playground or something, or a person wearing a mask walking down the street is akin to smoking a cigarette in an elevator, or it's akin to child abuse and it should be illegal. Again, it's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.